When we are contemplating the deep things of God and are thinking about the answer we can give to our culture that is skeptical about the existence of God and the ways of God, it can be a substantial burden on us. We like to be able to think that what we believe is something that everybody can be involved in. Like we want to be involved in the popular stuff, the stuff that everybody thinks is good and life enriching, and sometimes if we feel like, what are we the only ones duped here, or we feel like we can't give a good answer about why it is we believe what we believe, and so it can be a burden. We've experienced good things in our lives, and we've seen transformation in the lives of the people around us, and we just simply wish everyone could experience that, but not everybody does, and so how do we hold on to our faith and stay excited at a time when it seems like what we believe is under attack? And the truth is, God's people will always be under attack. People want to live their own lives their own way. And that's one of the lessons that Habakkuk is learning as he is watching and waiting. He's made a couple of complaints to God, prayers, I guess we could say. That sounds better than complaints. But he's asking God questions, and the answers are surprising him. And I wonder if it would have been, is this thing on? Did I hit a button and turn it off? Oh, that one's on, this one's not on. Okay. So, no, I can do that. No, the screen isn't on. Yeah. So I can see that, but I can turn around here. Okay, so I would have encouraged, before Habakkuk wrote his letter, began his prophecy, of course he's inspired, but if I were him, I would have read Psalm 73 first. Psalm 73 says, in this context, it's similar. And if you read some of the complaints that Habakkuk has, Psalm 73 is similar. Basically, why are all the bad people getting all the good stuff? And the psalmist says, he says, "Did I purify my heart and wash my hands in innocence for nothing? For I am afflicted all day long and punished every morning." So he's the psalmist is he's talking about the things that are going wrong in his world and the things that he observes. But the next section, I've underlined it here. It says, "If I had decided to say these things out loud, I would have betrayed your people." And what the psalmist means is, so it's like this psalm that he's written, or the song, or the poem, or whatever we want to call it. It's his personal musings. And so he has these questions, but he didn't go public with it. He didn't get up in front of the assembly and say, "Why is God acting like this? Why is God letting all this stuff happen? Why are the good people suffering and the bad people prospering?" See, he said, if I had decided to say these things out loud, aloud, I would have betrayed your people. He's realizing the power of negative words. Oftentimes, and you may have heard it, I've heard it a lot, where people within the body of Christ are pretty disrespectful toward the body of Christ. They grumble, they complain, they criticize. And it does a lot. Say if you go and experience a morning at church and in your mind everything is kind of wrong and reasons to complain and you're grumbling and your kids hear everything. Well, after a while, when they get old enough, they'll make that decision that everybody at church is dumb. I don't want to be there. So that's the thing. I think that's the point he's making. He didn't want to betray. He has these questions. You have these questions. I have these questions. But I'm not going to voice them in a way that disrespects God. Because that's basically what happens. We have to be very careful about, the difference between, constructive criticism and just grumbling. We have to be careful. Because the psalmist goes on to say in the rest of that section, when I tried to understand all this, it seemed hopeless until I entered God's sanctuary. Then I understood their destiny. So what's his point there? Yes, sir. The enemies? Yeah. So it's not, the question is understanding the nature of, and the difference between good and evil. The question is, those who do bad things will pay for their actions. You reap what you sow, right? So that's his point. But it says, when I tried to understand all this, it seemed hopeless until I entered God's sanctuary. Until I got perspective. Until I could look at things through the right lenses. And that made all the difference. Because if we just look at things just simply from the human, have you ever criticized somebody for doing something wrong and then you did it yourself? Has anybody ever done anything? Okay, we got some hands there. Yeah, that is such a human thing to do. And if you do that, fine. But don't call it. Don't call an audible. Because you're going to be calling it on yourself. You're going to be condemning yourself. And the point is not why are all the unrighteous people getting all the good stuff. That's not the question. Because they're not. He says, I understood their destiny. They're not getting the right stuff. And if you remember our time in Habakkuk last week, he's basically wondering about his own world and why things are going bad. And then God says, okay, I'm going to take care of this, and he's going to send Babylon to destroy Jerusalem. And Habakkuk says, how can those who are less righteous be used as punishment against us who are more righteous? And so more righteous, it's relative. And so the psalmist is giving Habakkuk perspective as Habakkuk watch and waits. And so the first thing, and I think Habakkuk has to clarify his role. His role is not to question God. Now, I know that goes against what we say sometimes, that, if you have doubt, deal with God about it. And we have to be honest, but it's the personal thing. If I got a problem with God, I need to take that one-on-one, not, telling the whole world that I have a problem with God isn't going to change my problem with God. It's just going to disrespect those who may be looking for an opportunity to turn to God. Or maybe those who are weak in their faith and they just need another reason to give up. So we have to understand our role as the watchman. And that's how he begins chapter 2, Habakkuk. It says, I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I will watch to see what he will say to me and what I should reply about my complaint. So he's using this terminology of the watchman standing on the watchtower, but what is he watching for? He's watching to see what God has done. Is that his job as a watchman? To see what God's going to do? No. The job of the watchman is to point out the dangers that are facing the city. I guess we have stuff like that. Maybe NORAD, the North American, I don't know, we have this early warning system that warns us if there's an enemy going to attack our country. We don't stand on a wall with a shofar and go, and, no, we have it differently, but the concept is still there. The job of the people at NORAD is not to complain about the circumstance. It's to keep your eyes open and watch and look for dangers. And when the dangers come, point those dangers out. Not complain about what's going on. There were all kinds of dangers in the ancient world, and so the role of the watchman was very, very significant because he could see things coming off, but because you're in a walled city, that's all you got. That's all, you can't escape from that. And so you have to be ready when the enemy attacks you. And so being notified in advance is the role of the watchman. Ezekiel chapter 3, so let's look at that, because this is one of the more significant passages that talk about this and about the role from the perspective of the prophet, or we can apply it to the role of the church, the role of you and me as someone, because we know what's going on, we have a responsibility to call out the dangers of what's going on. So it says, "Now at the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, I have made you a watchman over the house of Israel. When you hear a word from my mouth, give them a warning from me. If I say to the wicked person, you will surely die, but you do not warn him, you do not speak out to warn him about his wicked way in order to save his life, that wicked person will die for his iniquity, yet I will hold you responsible for his blood. But if you warn a wicked person, and he does not turn from his wickedness or his wicked way, he will die for his iniquity, but you will have saved your life. Now if a righteous person turns from his righteousness and practices iniquity, I put a stumbling block in front of him, he will die. If you did not warn him, he will die because of his sin, and the righteous acts he did will not be remembered. Yet I will hold you responsible for his blood. But if you warn the righteous person that he should not sin, and he does not sin, he will indeed live, because he listened to your warning, and you will have saved your life." That's pretty heavy. And I know specifically, as this is being written, it is a message to Ezekiel, but I think it expands out from just Ezekiel, that because we know the truth, we've been told what's going to happen. We've been told about what's right and what's wrong, and we encounter this all the time. But we don't always know how to interact with people when we want. I think that's the problem. I don't think we don't want to warn people. We just don't know how to engage in it. We don't know how to talk to people in a way that doesn't sound condemning, because that's, according to all the surveys and research that's done, the judgmental nature of Christians is the worst thing that we could possibly practice, and so don't do it. And so we don't do it, but we feel like we have this call, this responsibility to warn the person involved in sin, whether they're separated from God or whether they have a relationship with God and are kind of slipping back into sinful ways and sinful habits. And again, we've all known people who were very strong believers and who fell away. I'm excited, and I hope all of us We'll make sure we're loving on Gordon Erie, who's been coming the last couple of weeks. And Gordon has made a commitment to be involved. Now let's help him be involved. He asked us. It's one thing if we're nosing into people's business. But he asked us to hold him accountable. And to, if you don't see him, call him. He's expecting it. He wants to be held. He wants to be a person of integrity. And so let's make sure that we're doing that. And when we do things like that, when we are practicing the things that we're learning in this context, that helps us deal with things outside of the church family. And that's really where we're called to spread the gospel message, is outside the church family. But where do we practice? Where do I get to say the wrong thing and someone say, I don't think I would put it that way. I think I would put it this way. Well, that's what we're all about. That's what we're all about. And so we have to, be convicted that we're the watch people. We know the truth, and we have a role to play. Because there are a lot of dangers today that disrupt the lives of Christians, that disrupt the lives of people around us. In the Bible class this morning, so if you were in the young adult class in the library, last night I was just watching a YouTube video of Phil Robertson, Duck Dynasty, Duck Commander guy. And he was talking, I think he was speaking at Pepperdine. And it was funny how he was referring to his crowd as California. And how he's, how California is kind of the center of the universe for fruits and nuts. And and so he was, the way he was kind of jabbing at them for being on the edge of societal change, so to speak. But he said several years ago someone called him when he would still answer the phone. That was still his job, and it was a guy from Alabama who called to order a couple of duck calls, or maybe a big order of duck calls. I don't know. And the guy kept saying GD this and GD that, and so after the ordering was done, Phil said, "Why do you keep asking God to curse these circumstances and these people?" And I remember that was one of my early lessons that I learned in religious teaching, that when you say GD, you are asking God to curse whatever it is. And you say, oh, I don't mean that. But if you don't mean that, why are you using that terminology? And so he asked the guy, he said, why? And the guy said, did you get my order for the duck calls? And Phil said, yep. And the guy just hung up on him. And, fine. A couple of days after, the guy called him back and said, no one has ever talked to me about this before. What's going on with you? And so Phil invited him to come to Duck Commander headquarters, and he studied Scripture, and the man and his friend were baptized. And fast forward a couple of years, Phil is going to do a speech in Alabama for a church there, and he said, "Do you know so-and-so?" And Phil said, "Well, no, I don't recognize the name." And he said, "Well, he knows you. And you, they related the circumstance." And he said, "He's a leader in this church. He's one of the elders in this church now." So, how can we be like Phil? And I don't mean having the long beard. You don't have to have the long beard to be like Phil. But how can we be transparent like that and open and fulfill our responsibilities of being the watch people on the wall? The Hebrew writers, let's see. In our book, Habakkuk, let's get there. Let me flip back over. So as we read on, it says, "And the Lord answered me, write down this vision, clearly inscribe it on tablets, so one may easily read it. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It testifies about the end and will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late." So the answer that God is giving Habakkuk is that here's the answer: judgment is going to come. It's going to be delayed. And so, do we think we'll always have enough time? There'll always be enough time to have this discussion or have that interaction to make my decision to get committed. Maybe that's part of it. I don't want to I can't deal with it now. Maybe I'll deal with it later. I'll have an opportunity later. But do we need to see the urgency of it? The Hebrew writer, Hebrews 10, verse 37, and we won't look at that, but he quotes this passage from Habakkuk. And in the context of people thinking that they're always going to have enough time, or God said he was going to return. Where is he? He hasn't returned yet. Life goes on. Everybody gets everything that they want. The wicked prosper, and sometimes even the good people prosper. So there's this idea that we'll always have time. That there'll always be enough time to make the changes that we need to make. But he says, it will come. Though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late. So God's timing is always different from our timing. And it challenges us then to think about what we are trusting. And so part of the message here that God is trying to get across to Habakkuk is your job as a watch person is not to call out my bads. But your job is to warn the people. Don't question me. Don't ask how long until I respond in wrath. I'm going to respond. But you're not doing your job. You're not fulfilling your responsibility as one of my people. So focus on that. And because someone mocks and says, God hasn't come back yet, I guess he's not coming back. Don't get caught up in that. Take care of things now. And it's because of what we trust. This can be really convicting to followers of Jesus when we think about what it is we really trust and where we put our faith. Verse 5 says, verse 4, look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity. I'm not sure who he's talking about there. Some of the commentators say he's talking about the king of Babylon. Maybe he's talking about the king of Judah. Both of them, by the way, have the same problem. They're both filled with pretension. But then he says, in the rest of that verse, but the righteous one will live by his faith. So what do we trust? We will trust in something. Will it be in our own efforts? In our own inflated egos that basically are without integrity? Or will we live by faith and trust God? Those are the only two options. There's the trusting in self part, which involves pride. And that's always a starting point for anybody who is trying to figure out who they trust. And I don't know if we trust self because we have pride, or since we have so much pride, we just trust in ourselves. But those ideas are related. But the problem with it, and Habakkuk spends a lot of time, and we'll quickly outline some of the things, but talking about the problems that, why is this person, whoever he's talking about, the king of Judah or the king of Babylon, why is his ego inflated? Why is he without integrity? Verse 5, moreover, wine betrays an arrogant man and is never at rest. The life that is self-indulgent is a life that is at the mercy of the appetites of life. So, 1 John chapter 3, verse 15, or 2:15, 1 John 2:15, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Those are the three main categories of sin or things that we struggle with that are help us to understand what it means to be at the mercy of our appetites, what we see in ourselves, what we want, what we lust after, and the result is always restlessness. When we trust in ourselves, the result is always restlessness. And you don't have to be a king of Judah or a king of Babylon to be restless. I think that defines a majority of the people in our country. They're just never satisfied with anything. They always want more because they're trusting self, and self never pays off. Self always leaves you restless and wanting more. On the opposite, he says, the righteous will live by faith, or the just will live by faith. So there's the sense of rightness in a person's life. And because of that, we try to do the right things. We don't want the things that we embrace to be considered wrong or evil. And that means I'm going to pay attention to the things that I involve my life in. It's going to matter to me what I do, what I practice, what people see in my life. I care about it. I'm trying to live with a sense of rightness. To live by faith. And so if I realize that there's something that seems to be counterproductive, I'm doing some research right now on marijuana continues to be a problem in our culture, and of course in our state, and I think Colorado and maybe Oregon, we've legalized it. Does legalization of marijuana take away the problems that are connected to marijuana? No. The problems still connect to it, and so it may be legal, but it's not good. It's not right. And I can say that with certainty. Sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, marijuana doesn't hurt you." Yes, it does. I know it does. I know what it does. And my understanding, though I haven't had it lately, that it's more potent and more it's it's stronger, and the content of what messes you up is higher, and so the only thing that has changed in the reality of marijuana is that it'll mess up your life quicker. Now I know there's some good things. I know there's some medicinal purposes to it, and medicine is one thing, but recreational use can certainly be something else. And what we have to do is we have to look at the result of what we do. Habakkuk talks about victory. The result from living a life of trusting in self is frustration. And again, that's because we are trusting in things that go against what is right. We're trying to find contentment in something that never satisfies. So wrong is always wrong. You want to advance that for me, Ray? There we go. Let's see, is it working now? Okay. Well, let's see. Is it going to, it has to reset? You said, yeah, go ahead and bring them all up. Go ahead and bring them all up. Did they all come up? It's not working. Go ahead and bring them up. There's 2 more bullets. These are things that Habakkuk refers to in the rest of this chapter, verses 5 through 19. These are things that Habakkuk identifies as problems with the person who's subject to God's judgment. Wrong is always wrong, and sometimes these things seem like selfish ambition. What's the difference between being highly motivated and selfish ambition? You know, there's a fine line in understanding those things, and so you might be an ambitious person, and that might be something that, from different perspectives, is completely fine. So there's a point at which ambition crosses the line. Covetousness, we don't always see that for what it is. We see something that someone else has. Maybe I want it, but unless I actually act upon it, then it's really not a problem. So covetousness, again, the exploitation of people, what's the difference between getting people what they need and exploiting people for their needs? Drunkenness, it's kind of related to marijuana use. A lot of times people will tell you, hey, the Bible doesn't say you can't drink. But it does say you can't be drunk, right? So there's a line. And maybe we have a hard time realizing where the line is. Violence, that seems to be perhaps something that's cut and dry. And in idolatry, we may define that a little bit differently. And because we define that a little bit differently, we may not see the problems related to the way we put things into a place that rightfully belongs to God. So all of these things are things that there may be a blurring between whether or not they're right or wrong. But we have to have the conviction that they can be dangerous. And I believe that's what Habakkuk is missing in his ministry to the people of Judah. He is wondering, he obviously sees what they're doing is wrong. He calls it right. But he's questioning God, and in questioning God, he's missing the action that he should be taking. He's missing accomplishing the things that he's called to accomplish. And so I think it's a good point. Are we there? Are we guilty of that? Are we guilty of focusing on the wrong thing to the point that we're not doing the right thing? We're not doing what God called us to do as His children. Verse 20 is in the end of Habakkuk chapter 2 is perhaps Habakkuk's attempt to make the point, or at least the Lord's point to make it to Habakkuk about what he needs to do. says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let everyone on earth be silent in his presence." So there's the encouragement to just focus on what's most important in life. We can get caught up in focusing on the wrong things and not accomplishing what we need to accomplish. Oop. So, as we look at our role as followers of Christ, are we farsighted or nearsighted? And what we see in this chapter of Habakkuk, Habakkuk chapter 2, is that God helped Habakkuk to see himself a little bit clearer and understand a little bit more better of how God could act outside of the way we think he should act. See, that was his whole problem. He was not going to believe that God would use wicked Babylon to punish less wicked Judah. It's like there's a sliding scale on wickedness, and as long as you're on this side of the scale, then you're okay. He says, no. You're not going to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, but don't let that distract you from doing what you need to be doing. Don't let that put you in a position where instead of edifying and convicting the people of God, you're de-edifying the person of God. So I want to challenge over this next week as you look at our world to determine, am I farsighted? Meaning I'm not seeing what's far off, maybe God's end game. And if that's the case, then that's what verse 20 teaches us. Accept that. And realize that all of us should be silent in his presence. Or is it a matter of nearsighted? And that means I'm struggling with this stuff too. Help me to see, God, what I'm doing wrong. Help me to see not only what you want me to do with my life, but how you want me to live my life.